Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be reviewing Dig by J.H. Markert, and unfortunately Hand was not available today. He submitted some PTO so he could have a day off. So hope he's having a great time. So what we do here, I'm going to read the synopsis just to give us a little reminder of what the book is about, and we're going to go through the story along with my commentary. So of course there are going to be spoilers ahead. So if you want to wait, you can click off the video and then come back once you've read the book. Now, we also don't do trigger warnings here. So if that's important to you, then you might research those independently. So without further ado, let's get into it. 8 years ago, a boy took up an axe and slaughtered a dozen people. That odd, troubled boy, Jericho Dodd, has been dead and buried in his father's yard for years. But ever since that massacre, Crow Island has been a dark and unsettling place. When Jericho's father begins digging up the past he buried, a compulsion to dig sweeps over the island, and soon everyone else is obsessively churning up dirt, desperate to uncover buried secrets. The compulsion leads to violence, and as neighbors turn against each other, the island's famous Tupelo honey, harvested from the trees deep in the swamp, changes too. As dread and paranoia seep up from the ground, it becomes clear that the island itself needs something from its residents before it digs itself apart for good. Be careful what you might unearth from the dirt before this surreal horror novel can worm its way into you too. All right, so that's our synopsis, and let's get into the meat of the story. Oh, before I forget, I've actually got a plumber working here today, so if you hear anything going on in the background, that's why. So to get started, we have Amy, who is our main protagonist, and she gets a phone call from the Reverend Thomas Dodd, telling her things like the birds are real and dig. So Amy runs to Reverend Dodd's house. And this is an island. I guess it's kind of a small island. It's small enough that she can run to the Reverend's house. So she gets there. Reverend Dodd's already dead, already deceased and expired. She does try to do mouth to mouth, but there's kind of no point in doing that. And she does call 911, and then notably, Reverend Dodd is missing his hand. And she goes outside and notices holes that he has just been digging. 37 of them, to be exact. So now this has shifting viewpoints, which if you've followed me for a while, you know I don't really like that, but the author didn't ask me my opinion, so here we are. So now we switch to Nate, who is getting drunk at a Mexican restaurant, not on Crow Island. He left after Jericho, who is his brother, committed these multiple homicides. And I think Amy's parents, and she had a twin sister, I think they were victims also in that whole thing. And Nate is in this situation where he's on the brink of being fired because he very much tried not to have his past come with him. And one of his students found out about Crow Island, found out about the murders, was trying to pry information out of him, got upset, grabbed the kid, and Nate says, drug him across a row of desks. So now his job is kind of on the line. So he's 5 beers deep at this Mexican restaurant and gets a phone call. This phone call is from the sheriff on Crow Island, Lawrence Kilburn, and he's telling him, hey, your dad's dead. So it's the next day, and we are now with Lawrence, and he's been called to come to the swamp by Mr. Passafume, who is an apiculturist, which is a fancy name for a beekeeper. I didn't know what that was. I had to Google it. I knew it had a name, but I had to look it up because I couldn't remember it. Anywho, so Mr. Passafume runs these beehives to harvest the Tupelo honey, and that is the honey that Crow Island is kind of famous for. And you have to take a boat out there to it because he likes for the bees to be directly there with the Tupelo flowers so that they can just easily get the Tupelo nectar or pollen or whatever it is they make honey out of. I don't know. So Lawrence kind of goes through a little bit about the history and how even though it's called Crow Island, there are no actual crows there, even though the native populations do have them in like their art and their drawings. And fun fact, there was also a massacre of some of the native populations with, you guessed it, an axe. So, anywho, Lawrence goes on to talk about boo hags and the Appalachian region in the South. We get that folklore from the Gullah Geechee people. And he is always told his son that these are not real, this is fairy tales, but you kind of get the impression that he does sort of believe in them. He also talks about how they crawl in bed with people. And once I had this dream that I was getting chased by a boo hag, and this happened like before this book even came out, and they looked exactly the same as what he's described in the book here. And so I'm running from the boo hag, and she catches me. And then that goes into a sleep paralysis episode. And then I was telling my husband about it the next morning, and he said, well, I guess you need to buy more brooms. And I do actually have a broom downstairs in front of my front door for that very reason. But I do guess I need to buy more brooms. Them roots run too deep no matter where you've planted yourself. I can't get away for it because I will still smack somebody silly if they whistle outside at night around me. So anyway. He goes and he finds Mr. Passafume, whose first name is Earl, on the bee barge. So we're at the barge, and he tells Lawrence that a case of the honey has been missing. It's been stolen. Somebody broke into the honey house and took a case of 12 jars of this Tupelo honey. And there's also written in blood some graffiti that says, "Don't let the boo hag ride ya." And hopefully that's kind of like a euphemism for like a dream situation. And if it's not, maybe the boo hag and Baba Yaga are cousins and they're just kind of hanging out over there. And then also dig is one of the things written in blood. And that was also one of the things that Reverend Dodd told Amy to do before he died. And the blood animal is a human. Mr. Passafume said it's human and comes to that conclusion because there is a severed hand nailed to a tree. And we can all kind of guess whose hand that was because we all know who was missing one. Mr. Passafume says if your right hand offends you, cut it off. Lawrence asks if it's from the Bible, and it very much is. He's quoting Matthew chapter 5, verse 30, and yes, I am reading this directly out of my script. If thy right hand offend thee, cut it off and cast it from thee, for it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, but not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. So we're going into a flashback, and this is labeled as 3 days before the Reverend Dodd passed away. Now, Amy does say that her twin sister and her parents were some of Jericho's first victims. She also talks about her husband who had passed away. Doesn't say from what, and she talks about in comparison to her sister Bridget, she really didn't need anybody, that she was fine with her books and her own imagination, and honestly, I feel that. My sister, growing up, she was very much the social butterfly. I had like 2 friends, and that was more than enough. So Amy is swimming laps in her pool, and then this tremor happens. And these tremors have been happening for a time, and it causes a crack in the bottom of her pool. So while she's in there, the tremor's happening, the water's draining out, it's sloshing, she's hanging onto the side, she gets knocked off, and oh,
I'm done
yes.
Down here, yeah.
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay, guys, I'm gonna be right back. I'm gonna run down here with my plumber and see what happened here. Okay, just a second.
Yeah, this is what I was trying to tell you. So I've got the drain taken care of, and I think I've got most of it sort of taken. At least it's draining properly now. So
What is that?
But well, that's what I was trying to tell you about. So that's what was in your drain clogging it up. I'm not sure exactly how all of it got there. I'm not even sure really what it is, honestly. But the point here is your tub's draining great now, and I have to
No, you're gonna take that with you.
no, that's not part of what I do here. My goal here was just because we already talked about this, and I said, this is a quick fix, no problem, and I'm going to save you some money. This is unfortunately how we do that. So I take care of the clog. You can just handle cleanup.
I can get you a trash.
No, because you see the problem here is I don't want that in my work truck.
I don't want it in my house.
I can sympathize with that, but work truck. So but I'll tell you what I can do. I'm going to email your invoice. I'll email it. Okay. I do have other calls that I need to go make. So I'm going to.
No. I am paying you. Okay, you know what? I am not going to deal with this right now.
I'm just gonna, deal with that a little later. Okay, let's see. Where were we? Okay, let's see here. She's in the water. The eels start to charge her. Okay, I need you to get down. Get down. Here you go, good boy. Okay, so the water's receding and she's trapped down there. And of course, there's a ladder, but the ladder is up high on the wall. So she's trapped. And then she starts to hear this whispering come out of this crack that's in the bottom of her pool. And then she says she feels Jericho's presence. Now, she starts, of course, crying out for help. Someone does show up to help her. And it's a guy whose name is Mitchell. And Mitchell is the mayor's son, Mayor McBride. I don't think we get a first name for Mayor McBride, so I've just been calling him Mayor McBride. Of course, there could be a name. I take really terrible notes. Anyways, you have a woman trapped in an empty pool, 12 feet down, and he asks her if she heard anything about him. Why? Stroking your ego? So Mitchell is apparently home from college because he had some kind of like a nervous breakdown sort of thing. So he does help her out. He reaches something down to her, something with a wooden handle, and it's an axe. Now she does turn around to say thank you, but he's already leaving. Normally that would kind of have me a little bit icked out just by him doing there, but in defense, Amy was calling out for help, so he hopefully was just walking by and just happened to hear her, but he was still being kind of weird. All right, so now we're back to Lawrence, and Lawrence is now transporting Reverend Dodd's hand in an evidence bag, and while he's doing that, he gets a call from his deputy saying that someone has called and said that their husband is digging and he will not stop digging. We also find out that Lawrence and Mr. Pastifume do both think that there was something wrong with Jericho from the start. Now we're back to Nate, and he is having a flashback to the day that Jericho was born. And this is where he did just straight up call Jericho a murderer, and he thought as much since he found out that his mom was pregnant. And Bridget had said that he didn't really look like an infant, that he was already as big as a toddler when he was born. And Nate did not want to hold him because apparently Jericho made everyone around him uncomfortable. Now we're back to Amy. And she's having a nightmare about a boo hag coming up from the bottom of the crack in her pool, telling her to dig down deep. And the horned one is coming. Now, apparently, she also occasionally takes Ambien, and she's hoping that that nightmare just came on the back of her having to take that because she was unsettled from finding Reverend Dodd deceased. I can imagine that would be very unsettling. I myself have never seen a dead body outside of the funeral home already in a casket and prepared. I've never seen a dead body like that. I can imagine, again, that would be very, very unsettling. So she tells us about the aftermath of this event that happened when she was a kid, where she says that she drowned. And what she describes while she was dead from drowning, gets chalked up to a kid having an overactive imagination. I can relate to that because I too had an overactive imagination, so I can kind of relate to that. Amy is also writing a book about Crow Island and kind of its history, but just the good stuff, because that's what her now deceased parents wanted, was try to get interest back to the island, bring the tourism back. And there was, they called it the club era, which I think was after like World War II, when they had all of these, gentlemen's clubs and stuff like that. That being said, you would probably get a better response from the goopy stuff, because how many people would go visit the Lizzie Borden house if the murders hadn't happened? Not as many, and that's fact. I like going to look at historic houses, but it's a lot more fun when there's a dubious past. So she does talk about the island's past and how it was built on crime and violence, and talks about blood-soaked ground. She also talks about how everything grows better there now. Blood contains iron. Iron is essential for plants, for wildlife, for life in general, so she might be onto something with that. So Amy's tired after waking up, chalks that up to the sleeping pill she took, but she does notice that in her bedroom there's some things moved around, which is a little bit strange, and thinks that a boo hag may have actually gotten into her house. Back to Lawrence. So Lawrence is at another house with a gentleman named Johnny, who has been just compulsively digging holes. He asked his deputy to pull the list of registered axes and check them all for blood, trying to see if they can figure out which axe amputated Reverend Dodd's hand. And Crow Island, after the massacre, all of the axes had to be registered. And then he also asked him to make a list of people who called them for being exhausted because they got ridden by a hag. So while he's there trying to get Johnny figured out, he gets a text from his dispatch officer. No one has seen the mayor, Mrs. Mayor, or Mitchell in a while. So Johnny's been digging long enough in this hole that he's down inside of it, and Amy jumps down there to be into it with him. And Amy is here because Lawrence called her over there because she is the resident expert on boo hags. So they have this list compiled of people that have called and talked about being exhausted and thinks they may have been gotten ridden by a boo hag. And then we also have the axe registration list, and the McBrides. Well, they're not on it. Back to Nate. So Nate is actually on the ferry as we speak to Crow Island, and he's trying to describe if it's the distance, or if he's actually grieving the loss of his father, or if it's turned into something else completely. And parental distance can have a lot of complicated emotions that go along with it. So he gets off the ferry and he talks about how he can just feel Jericho in the air. Then all of a sudden, a bunch of dogs start barking. And this entire time, he has hoped that nobody's going to recognize him. And the guy that drives the ferry says, "Brace yourself, Nate." So much for laying low. And then the dock starts to shake. And it's another tremor. Now we're back to Amy. So everyone on Amy's half of the boo hag list has also been digging. We also learn that when Amy sold the island, because she inherited this entire island from her parents, but she sold it to the state of Georgia, one of her stipulations was a welcome center and a museum, which she's kind of the manager of the day-to-day stuff. And she also says that the truth deserves to come out, and hopefully that means her book is going to just acknowledge the ugliness of what's happened here. Because in my mind, the truth is not always convenient or fun. So Amy gets to the last house on her list, and the situation, the person is digging not in his own yard, but he's actually digging up in his neighbor's yard. And the neighbor is kind of upset about this. And then he's like, "Well, you know what? You ought to be digging too." She's like, "Okay, give me a shovel." As I tear down my display. And then we get that tremor that comes through, the same one that happened when Nate stepped off the ferry. This is another reason I don't like back and forth points of view. So we're going to Lawrence again, and he is at the mayor's house to check on things. And Easy Perkins, that is a nickname, I don't think it tells us what her actual name is, comes over to help, even after Lawrence, who is the sheriff, told her not to do that. So the door's cracked open. There's a bloody footprint. By all means, Easy, please come in and contaminate this potential crime scene. I would not care at this point, honestly, if Easy got the axe, because she's getting on my nerves a little bit. But the family does seem to be gone. And so they're looking around, and in Mitchell's room, the floor of his bathroom has just been completely torn up. And down in the dirt and the mud under the house, there is an indentation in the ground in the shape of an axe. He also, Lawrence, threatens to cuff Easy because she shouldn't even be in there in the first place. All right, so now we're having a flashback. And this was after the massacre had happened, and Lawrence is interrogating Rose, who owns the hardware store. She was the one who sold Jericho the axe. Now, Jericho was 10. I don't know that I would have done that, but it's not outside the ordinary for, like, in the South, like, farm kids to be sent places to buy those kinds of things. Like, I can remember going to the store when you could put stuff on a tab, and I remember going and getting tobacco for my dad, to get his chewing tobacco, because I had a signed note saying that it was okay. So that kind of stuff's not outside the realm of possibility. Okay, back to Nate. So Nate is reminiscing about these murders, and I must not have been paying too much attention in the beginning because I was thinking it was just like a few people, but it was like a straight up massacre. It happened at the 4th of July parade, and he attacked an entire crowd. And Nate also had the hots for Bridget, which was Amy's twin sister. And who does Nate see at the newly built Welcome Center? Amy. And for a second there, he thinks he's seen a ghost, passes out. Just before he loses consciousness, he does look up in the sky and notice these red birds, and they're crows. But red crows aren't really a thing. But Reverend Dodd had doodled in his journal a bunch of red birds before he had died. Back to Amy. So she and Nate are catching up, and as they're walking along, Nate sees dogs and townspeople, and they're all digging, and of course he asks what is happening. Amy says they don't really know why. She tells him about, his dad calling her before he died, and that she was supposed to tell Nate to dig. He asked about the tremors, and she said they started a few months after the massacre, and Nate's like, oh, okay, so after we buried Jericho. And the answer was yes. So these have been going on for a time. Because I don't take great notes, I don't remember exactly how many years that was, but it's been a time that they've been going on since after Jericho died. Back to Lawrence. So Lawrence has contacts at some of the other islands around Georgia, because there are some other ones. Tybee Island is the only one I know for sure, but there's, I think, a couple others. And he's been texting back and forth with these other, I don't know if they're specifically sheriffs or whatever, about like, hey, are you guys feeling these tremors? And no one else seems to be feeling any of these tremors. And so looks to me like it's just kind of localized with Crow Island. Now, he's been called to another house of some unexplained digging. And in this situation, the person who was digging, not sure of the reason, hung himself. And while there, the wife of the decedent hear these gunshots off in the background. Back to Nate. So he and Amy are in the park, and they're still walking along, and they run into this neighbor dispute. And the shooter is a gentleman named Stephen Delacroix, and kind of get the idea that he maybe doesn't exactly realize what he's doing. And Nate does manage to get the gun away from him. Amy's called Lawrence, and Nate's, trying to stall him until he gets there. Stephen kind of seems to snap out of it and asks Amy if the other guy was dead. And, of course, she says yes. And then Stephen tries to get the gun back so that he can shoot himself. Lawrence happens to get there and is able to pistol whip him and prevent that from happening. Nate says he left this island to get away from all this violence, and he's been here no more than a few minutes, and he's already been thrust back into it. Back to Lawrence. So Lawrence has Stephen in his cells trying to figure out what caused this incident. Stephen seems to have a history of violent behavior in the guise of 2 ex-wives who both left him because of abuse. He says that the other guy, Terrence, was stealing money from him, and they were business partners. They were like contractors. And Stephen asks Lawrence if he believes in dinosaurs and talks about the fossil that he found. So Lawrence gets tired of him dodging questions and just leaves to go to Stephen's house to investigate himself. He finds, of course, a bunch of holes. And then there's one very deep one that he has like a tent set up over it. And he describes it more like an excavation site. And so he goes and looks down in, and inside this hole is a bone, too big to be a human, according to Lawrence, and prediction time. Are these tremors happening because the island has like some sort of sentience and it's like rejecting Jericho's bones? That's why everyone's just compelled to dig because the island just has its, just like,
Get the bones out of my dirt, you pine cones.
back to Amy. So Amy is home and she realizes that she still has Terrence's blood on her, and she just decides she's going to take a shower. Now, she also keeps going back and forth with herself on whether or not to charge her deceased husband Chad's cell phone. And she is having some doubts because when Amy's parents passed, she inherited, of course, this island and a large sum of money. So there was always this nagging in the back of her head, is like, is he really with me because he loves me or because I'm loaded? I can totally understand that. So part of it is she's wondering if he was actually out doing boat maintenance when he died, or if she's afraid of what she might see if she does charge the phone. Now, me being me, I would be insanely curious and I'd be charging that phone. So she talks about her memory of the other side, which is this, she visualizes that place, which is where she went when she drowned, if she has an anxiety attack, and that does kind of have a calming effect. She talks about seeing a boy boo hag there with horns, and the lady boo hag that came out of the crack in her pool and said that the horned one was coming. And she talks about hearing Jericho's voice, but Jericho actually didn't talk. But she said she knew it was his voice. She also talks about the birds being red there, and these red birds keep showing up. And so while she's having these thoughts, Mr. Passifume comes knocking, PJs and all, and just says he did it. He got 100% purity. And it takes Amy a second to register that he's talking about the Tupelo honey. Back to Nate. They buried Jericho with the axe. Also, Jericho was 10. And at 10 years old, he was already 6 feet tall and 250 pounds, supposedly because of a pituitary tumor that was just flooding him with growth hormones. But Nate says he always felt like something with that boy ain't right. So Nate is staying at his parents' house. I would have just stayed at a hotel. And a house my size is one thing, like it's not huge. It is old, but it's not huge. But staying in a huge plantation house by myself, where my murderous grown man 10-year-old brother used to stay and where my dad dropped dead, I'm getting a hotel. There is at least one hotel on Crow Island, there has to be. So Nate has evidently been having these nightmares about Jericho digging himself up, and talks about his bedroom having been locked after he died, and the key was in his parents' bedside table. And yes, I'd absolutely be going in there very first thing because my curiosity has always been stronger than my fear. And if I ever die in some strange place, just know that I went in there because there was something there that I just needed to look at. And also, don't tell Dateline that my smile lit up a room and everybody wanted to be my friend. It's not my joke, but it's funny. So he gets there to his house and does notice that all the windows are open. Now, it is a thing in, at least in Appalachia, and I don't know if it's in the South as a whole. If someone dies in the house, you open up all the windows so that their spirit can get out. So Nate is describing, his house and how much his mom, Samantha, loved it. And he's doing this as he's going around closing all these windows. And he gets to the library where his dad had died, and the dried blood is still there on the carpet. So naturally, this leads him out to the backyard where all the holes are, and he starts digging too. But he's digging in a very specific place. He's going to dig up Jericho's grave, if nothing else, to prove to himself that he's still in there. Now we go back to Amy. So Mr. Passafume, whose first name is Earl, can't remember if I mentioned that or not, isn't Amy's because he has achieved 100% purity in this Tupelo honey. He can apparently assess this by taste because he's been doing this for a very long time. And he tells Amy about the purity levels in years past. And she's also, while he's talking, trying to figure out like how old he is because he seems to be one of those people that, like, and I feel like there's one in every town that's been like an old man as long as everybody else can remember. So now this 100% purity is achieved by the bees only taking pollen or the nectar or whatever it is. Again, I don't study bees. I don't know what they use to make the honey, but they took it just from the Tupelo blossoms alone because bees normally will just take, from whatever's there. But this time they only took it from the Tupelo blossoms. So they're talking, and Amy is kind of overwhelming him with questions about Jericho. Why was he scared of him? What did he know? Did he just come here to tell her about the honey? So he goes to leave and is like, "You aren't the only one who's lonely here, lady." She does talk about seeing the indentation of a wedding ring on his finger. So most likely he was probably married at some point. But I do think there's something else here. And Amy wonders why some other things about, like, why he never squashed her imagination. Why did he understand when she talked about the other side and things like that? He does tell Amy, though, to look into those other years where he had almost 100% purity and to kind of do some digging of her own. So Lawrence is putting his son to bed, and his son asked him about the boo hags because he saw his dad got the haint blue paint out of the garage, and you paint your ceiling with it, and it's supposed to keep your porch ceiling specifically to keep the boo hags away. Maybe I need to get some haint blue paint to add to my broom. So Lawrence asked his son David where he heard about those from, and then, like most kids hear about stuff, is from another boy at school. And the little boy had told him that his dad got ridden by a boo hag, and now he won't stop digging up the backyard. Now, this person wasn't on their list of people that had gotten ridden by the boo hag, so that was kind of new. And it comes up a lot that people say that David doesn't really look like Lawrence. Now, genetics are funny that way because with me, I look exactly like my mom, and my sister looks exactly like my dad. So genetics are kind of funny that way. But it does cause Lawrence to kind of wonder if something happened with Tina, his wife, because apparently she's been horned up lately and he keeps putting this off. And he says it's the same old question that's been bubbling up since David was born. Now, he does ask, but the question he asks is if Tina loves him. And Tina gets offended and says, "Of course I do." Lawrence, I don't think, is convinced because instead of following Tina to bed, he decides to go paint the porch at probably midnight. It doesn't specify. Once in my entire 16-year marriage have me and my husband argued to where he didn't sleep in the bed with me. I didn't sleep that night, like, at all. All right, so now we're having a flashback. Amy and her twin sister Bridget and Nate are going to the bee barge because Nate said he saw a purple snake there. And they're on the bee barge, and Amy swears she can see a shadow just moving under the boat. And she does think that she may have seen a yellow rabbit with a red tail in the trees. Now, is this just an overactive imagination, the rabbit? Maybe. In all fairness, the shadow under the boat could be an alligator. We are in Georgia after all. They do have those in Georgia. Nate collapses and then shoots back up and just says, "Dad." And then he runs for the shore. And Amy, we've been hearing about this near drowning, and this is where it happens because she sees this shadow move under the boat again with these horns, and she falls into the water. Back to Amy, present day. She's having this dream where she's on the other side and she describes the colors being almost inverted. The grass is yellow, the deer are black, and they've got red antlers, and the crows are red, and there's this barn. And inside this barn is apparently where the boohags hang their skins because that's how they work. During the day, they will wear the skin of a person and then they take it off at night. And if you want to keep them from getting back in the skin, you got to dump salt in. Anyway, so she's in this barn with these boohag skins, and then at the very end, she sees this male boohag with the horns. She runs and it gives chase, and then so do all of these other boohags. That would be a horrific nightmare to have. One was bad enough. I couldn't imagine multiples. So, Amy has been doing some research on these years with the Tupelo honey when it was at its highest purity. Those all coincide with some kind of tragedy or incident of violence, including when Jericho Dodd went on his killing spree. There was also a random shooting at a bank one year, some higher instances of violence, notably a woman who beat her husband to death with a rolling pin. We get some insight into her husband's cell phone because she has not given this up. And it looks like she had questions about as to whether or not he really loved her for her or if it's because of the money and the property. So Amy finally gets the nerve to plug it in and she knows passcode 0529, which is their anniversary, and it declines. He changed his passcode. This does not inspire a lot of confidence in Amy and does not help the doubts as to whether or not he loved her or not. So before she can get too far into it, Nate calls and asks her to come over that he found something. So there, Amy goes back to the Dodd house, and Nate's up there on the hill where they buried Jericho, and he has dug up Jericho's grave. And he ain't in it. The pine box is there, and they also buried him with the axe. And that's not there either. It's gone. Now, Nate does agree that yes, the coffin, because it was just a pine box, the coffin could have deteriorated, the handle on the axe could have deteriorated, but where are the bones? Because that doesn't explain why the bones aren't there. Nate also shows Amy this huge bone that he finds, and he assumes that it's a dinosaur bone because it's massive, and what else could it be? Amy tries to get him to leave this be for now and go inside, but he does say he needs to keep digging. And we're at a flashback. Now, this is neither here nor there, but the person that was speaking here actually used the term sneak thief. I have not heard anyone say that word since my pet boss Sizemore died. And it's a group of lawmen, and I really don't remember who was speaking here, are on their way to arrest a woman whose name is Adeline Drew for massacring a bunch of people with, you guessed it, an axe. Maybe we just don't have axes on the island at all at this point. But anyway, so Adeline Drew she's pregnant here, and Amy had this old picture with some relatives in it, and her papa gave it to her, and one of them looks shockingly like Mr. Passafume. Is this one of his relatives? I hesitate to use the word ancestor. I feel like that should be reserved for ancient relatives. So this sheriff at this time, he goes in and Adeline Drew is gone and there's nothing there but a baby. Back to Lawrence. Not a lot going on here with this chapter. Just talks about how his son David is very perceptive. And one thing to note is that David seems to have this tick where he winks his right eye a couple times. Now, the doctor is saying that it'll go away with time, but Tina, who historically is not a worrier, is very concerned about this tick and kind of put a pin in that because I didn't realize on the read through the first time, this is foreshadowing. Back to Amy. So Amy still can't get her husband's phone figured out, so she's just put that to the side for now. She is still digging into these incidents of violence during these Tupelo honey purities. And one of them that she mentions talks about a lady at a sewing factory who killed a bunch of other seamstresses with a pair of shears. Why would you be scared of scissors? Scissors on their own cannot cut you into teeny tiny little pieces. I'm not going to get rid of all the scissors in the house. We don't have an HR department here, buddy, so you'll just have to deal with that. Anyway, that year, the cotton harvest was apparently massive. She's taking this picture, the one that her papa gave to her, because she is just going to directly ask Mr. Passafume, because she thinks that that is his father, because there is a huge resemblance. And again, genetics is funny like that. Some people are little carbon copies of their parents. So Amy's on her way to see Mr. Passafume, talks to Lawrence on the phone, and says he needs to check Mayor McBride's house again, and there's a lot of questions around this axe that Mitchell had, because according to the registry, they didn't own one. But the one under Mitchell's bathroom came from somewhere. And we're back to Lawrence. And oh my lord, he goes to the hardware store to talk to Rose about her shovel supply and to procrastinate what he was really needing to do. While we're there, there's a feller coming out whose name is Caleb, and he had actually dated Tina in high school, and what really bothered Lawrence was Caleb winked at him as he walked by. And then Lawrence realized that Caleb wasn't really winking at him. It was a tick like his son, David. That's better than an episode of Dallas. All right, so flashback, and this is a flashback from Nate. And this is one of those instances where Jericho has gone to the honey house, and Nate's been told to go up there and retrieve him. And Nate talks about Jericho getting some salt spilled on him, and it kind of freaked him out, and he wiped it off really quickly and was checking his skin, almost like he wanted to make sure that it wasn't burned. And the salt had spilled on the table, and when the Reverend Dodd goes to clean up the spilt salt, Jericho stops him and started to count the grains. Still Nate, but present day. So he's been digging, and he has uncovered more of these giant bones, and one of them is like running under the house. So now he's contemplated tearing up the library floor. Like, this is just me, and believe me, I understand attachments to family property probably better than most people, but I probably would have just stayed gone. Yeah, a lot of funeral homes broadcast funerals over the internet now. So anyway, Nate had been getting some phone calls, and they were all kind of mysterious. Now, I think that the person on the other end was Jericho, because they were saying some really cryptic things. And so Nate just ended up breaking his phone. And they kept calling, and that was why he broke it. And he doesn't actually remember, but he's pretty sure he bashed it with a shovel. So Nate tells us by the time that Samantha was 4 months along in this pregnancy, she already looked like she was 9 months. So there is something that was going on with Jericho's rapid growth, because remember, when he was 10, he was 6 feet tall. And there's also a lot of resentment that Nate has harbored toward his mom that comes in the form of, why wasn't being just the three of them enough? And why did she even want to have another baby in the first place? And that left Nate kind of with these feelings of, why wasn't I enough? And that was just exacerbated by his mother's death. And that kind of resentment can turn into anger real quick. I'd tell you how I know, but we don't have time to unpack all that. So Nate reminisces about the night he thinks that Jericho was conceived, and how Reverend Dodd went out into the swamp and came back stumbling. stumbling like he was drunk. And Nate felt like that wasn't really his dad, and even makes a blanket statement that he did not think Jericho was human. He didn't walk apparently until he was 2 years old, but when he did walk, it was like he just took off walking. Nate describes it as he was born grown but only half baked, whatever that means. So Nate has somehow just found himself again at Jericho's bedroom door, doesn't remember going up there. The door's locked, but he knows where the key is, but he still doesn't go in. And the curiosity of whatever is in there is absolutely killing me. Instead, Nate goes downstairs and starts tearing up the library floor. Back to Lawrence. Of course, he cannot let go of Caleb and this eye tick. And as I have said many times, I love it when authors use words that I'm familiar with, because Lawrence is trying to interview Mary Winslow, whose husband hung himself in the midst of her hole digging, and the author uses the word humdinger. And I love it because the story that she does tell him is a humdinger. So she killed her husband, metaphorically. He put the noose on and she was the reason. Now, apparently her husband, I don't think it gives us his name, had gambled away everything they had, their retirement, their children's inheritance, their savings. He was $400,000 in debt. And to make up for that and fund this gambling habit, he made up these fake charities, fake claims of cancer, just to get people to send him money to fuel this gambling addiction. So Mary had dug up all this evidence for these fake charities and all these scams and was going to take them to Lawrence for a case of fraud. Now, he decided, instead of dealing with that embarrassment, he was just going to hang himself. And as Lawrence is leaving, he wonders about Jericho. And a question that no one else has asked yet is, how big would he be if he had still been alive? Back to Amy. So Amy is once again talking with Mr. Passafume about the island's history. She wants to rewrite her book, and she's going to tell the truth, the inconvenient one. So she is wondering about the freed slaves and where they all went, because it seemed like after World War II, the descendants of those people, they left. The only ones that remained are Mr. Passafume and the Geechee woman, who's been mentioned a few times in passing, but I'm pretty sure she's dead at this point. Amy did also say that Mr. Passafume was the only one not digging up his yard, and by her thinking, that means he's the only one that is still rationally thinking. So Amy brings up the Tupelo yields and how they all coincide with these acts of violence, and Mr. Passafume uses the term cluster violence. This is a real concept. I Googled it, and it's described as typically refers to the phenomenon where violent crimes such as assaults and homicides are not distributed evenly across a city, but are heavily concentrated in specific geographic hotspots, like an island with a dubious past. So Amy's still kind of prying at Mr. Passafume to get him to talk. He's, I think, the oldest person on the island, and Amy is being a little too insistent. But if he's got the answers, he does need to say something. Share them. So Amy thinks that to get to those high yields of products, whether it's cotton or indigo or honey or blue crab or whatever it be, the island needs blood. And hence these instances of cluster violence. Mr. Passafume, she has noticed, has also been leaving flowers on these graves. One of whom is the grave of Adeline Drew, who is, I think, the Geechee woman that we keep hearing about. I don't make a note of every single character because I am not sure if they're important or not, just if you were curious as to why my notes are so bad, along with my memory. So Amy just straight up asks him, why was he so scared of Jericho? And if Reverend Dodd went into the honey house, since Nate said he thought he saw him go in there, and as far as I'm aware, the only person to ever go in there was Mr. Passafume, and I think Amy, when she was little, also went into the honey house. Now, Mr. Passafume here makes a blanket statement about how Amy's family was awful to him and his family, and that is all true. Adeline Drew, the Boo Hags, all of it is also true. But he doesn't want to tell her because even though she wants to know, he says, no, you don't. And this man in the photo that Amy's Papaw gave her looks so much like Mr. Passafume because it is Mr. Passafume. This has been the best chapter so far. Back to Nate. So Nate has now torn up the library floor and is uncovering more of this bone that he had suspected was running under the house. While deciding what part of the house to tear up next, someone knocks on the door. It's the undertaker, or funeral director as we call him now, with Reverend Dodd's ashes. So before he had died, Reverend Dodd had gone to the undertaker and said he didn't want a funeral. He just wanted his ashes scattered on Samantha's grave. And the undertaker tells Nate that his son had been stealing valuables out of caskets before the burial. Now, I don't know if this is strictly a Southern thing, but we put things in caskets with people to be buried. I put a necklace I loved in the casket with an uncle I loved very much, and we shared a birthday. I put a ring in my casket, in the casket with my Papa Sizemore, and a bracelet in with Mama Sizemore. So I don't know if that's strictly a Southern thing or not. Let me know in the comments. So the Undertaker has now delivered Reverend Dodd's ashes, and Nate says he'll tend to his last wishes later and proceeds to continue tearing out the floors. Back to Lawrence. So Lawrence coming in hot to confront his wife about David. And before doing that, he does check on David, who is in the middle of having a nap, and his wife is on the couch typing away on a laptop. Not her laptop, but Lawrence's laptop. Tina's perusing his emails and is kind of startled when Lawrence moves in. What do you need a laptop for? What high-powered finances? Cryptocurrency. Scrap coin. Scraps, that's called a rug pull. And you are going to have a lot of people be very upset with you. Do not buy any of that. Anyway, moving on. So straight to the point, he just goes right up to Tina and asks her, "Is David mine?" And Tina goes immediately pale, and she has the nerve to slap him. But she admits it. She said it was a one-time thing. No one knows. They were apparently having trouble conceiving. Lawrence was against the idea of adoption because he wanted a child that was biologically his. She says Caleb doesn't know, but Lawrence doesn't believe her. And while all this is happening, outside is chaos. While they're inside, Lawrence hears the Crow Island rescue chopper. Now, the only person who is licensed to fly this is the deputy. Checks his phone, phone's dead. Tries the radio, also dead. Power goes out. So he's going to drive his car out to where he thinks the helicopter is landing, and the car dies. What is happening? Oh my gosh. So all he can do is just kind of watch as the helicopter's blades stop spinning and it plummets down into the sea. Back to Amy. So Amy is, of course, still reeling from the man in the photo actually being Mr. Passafume, and if that's the case, that would make him well over 100 years old. So she is running down to the beach because she's seen the chopper going down, and the deputy, before it goes down, he actually jumps out. I don't know if maybe he didn't have enough time to pull his parachute or maybe he didn't think he was that high, but he has shattered both of his legs. He does tell Amy to develop the film. And this gentleman, whose name is Matt Folsom, who was swimming, said that he saw the deputy toss this out. And he just tosses kind of a camera down in the sand there next to Amy. And then he asks Amy if she thinks he saw what he'd done. So the deputy has now passed from either the trauma or the blood loss, and Amy looks out into the sea and she does see what looks like a body bobbing out there. And she said while she was running to the beach, she felt like the air was charged with static, and her phone is dead also. Back to Nate. And this is a flashback. So Nate finds Jericho in his room banging his head against the back of the wall. And that's kind of something that he just did. And in order to stop that, Nate would put his hand behind Jericho's head between him and the wall until he would stop. And so eventually he stops. Nate asks him if he's okay. And of course, Jericho doesn't say anything because remember, he didn't talk. And Nate just takes that as a yes. Now back to Nate present day. So he hears this helicopter go over, and when it goes overhead, power goes out. So he, of course, when your power goes out, you go find the candles. And he does remember seeing some in his the parlor where his dad kind of set up a memorial for Samantha. And so Nate gets there, he sees these candles, but he also sees a photo album, and he's flipping through these pictures, and part of this repressed memory that he has coming through the surface, because he sees a picture of his mom and dad when they were younger on the bee barge. And he talks about he remembered following his dad out into the swamp when he went to the honey house. But he can't remember what his dad was doing in there and said he really doesn't want to know. Back to Lawrence. So Lawrence goes to Caleb's house to confront him and sees, of course, a hole. And Caleb shows him what he says looks like a rib cage. Then Caleb also tells Lawrence that Mitchell McBride was there with his axe, and he, went to confront him, but he, got scared away. Lawrence asked Caleb if there's any blood on the axe, but he doesn't know because he couldn't get close enough to see. But he needs to show him something, and that he caught one of them. One of them what? Back to Amy. So Amy is taking this camera to drop it off to get developed, and the owner of the photo place, his name is Dennis, and he wants to show her something. So he takes this candle and goes back to where there's this photo of the town and puts the candle close to it so she can see, and he points. So Amy's studying this photo, and there, by the bank, is a boo hag, skinless and white-haired. So this picture was taken just the night before. So just last night. He also shows Amy a picture of the inside, and apparently it was completely and totally ransacked. And there was a footprint, real narrow, just the heel, the ball of the foot, and the little claw marks. Boo hag foot. Back to Nate. So Nate is heading to the honey house to see if he can get the rest of this repressed memory to come back, but then he decides to take a detour. He goes to the house of Dr. Cheevers, the doctor who delivered Jericho, and he wants to know what this secret was between him and his father. And Dr. Cheevers act like he doesn't even know what Nate's talking about, and Nate's like, oh yes, you do. Why did the doctor and Reverend Dodd keep Jericho hidden for 5 days after he was born? Back to Lawrence. Caleb tells him he caught a boo hag in his garage, that he just happened to see it snooping around in there and just shut the door. Well, he didn't shut the door, it went down, it was a garage. And Caleb also lights up a cigarette and says that maybe they don't like smoke because someone he knows burns incense 24/7 and had not been visited by any of them yet. So they go in the garage and it's there. And somehow Caleb got it chained up and it talks. It says one word: Jericho. So it lunges. Caleb shoots it. Somehow it had gnawed through this chain and was just waiting for its chance. Caleb said it was smarter than he thought. I don't know if I trust you on just a leash. I'm still looking. Anyway, back to Amy. Everyone has also been talking about how thick the air has gotten, and there's just like this haze over everything. Nate, or at least I think it was Nate, said that he thinks it's dust in the air from everyone digging. Caleb also said much the same. They also think that it's just like his presence, and that the presence is just Jericho hanging in the air like that. And that's kind of what Amy's thinking. So Amy is on the way to Matt's house, the one who had apparently drowned his brother when the helicopter went down, and we get another tremor. I feel like that's been the first one in a while, and Amy has been timing them, and she said this one lasts a full 9 seconds. And she says the air feels like it did on the other side, the place that she saw when she drowned, and the place where the Boohags live. Something about Matt's lawn. It is not dug up. He seems to be the only one in town so far who has not dug up his yard. She goes up to the house, and he just calmly invites her in, and she's all alone here, by the way. Now, even though his yard is perfect, the inside of his house is apparently piles of dirt and torn up floorboards. He's also been talking to Mitchell. Mitchell stole the honey at the behest of the Boohags, and the axe he's been carrying. Remember, the McBrides didn't have an axe. Mitchell's axe belonged to Jericho Dodd. It is the axe, and Mitchell told Matt that it burrowed its way to him. There's also a train coming through, so if you hear that, I'm sorry. I can't do anything about that. Remember, Lawrence saw this axe-shaped divot in the ground under Mitchell's bathroom where he'd torn the floor up. So Matt tells Amy that Mitchell was indeed the one to cut off Reverend Dodd's hand, and that Reverend Dodd had begged him to. He gives Amy time to leave before he then shoots himself because he tells Amy he doesn't want to be around to see what comes next. Is that also why he drowned his brother? Save him the trauma? Back to Nate. Nate's in the swamp at the honey house. The door is standing open, and he's getting snippets of this memory back now, seeing his dad in there with something that he said stretched and grew until the light went out. He's also processing what he learned at Dr. Cheever's and says they should have killed Jericho right then and there. And is also wondering why his dad's hand was cut off. So in the honey house, the bees have kind of spilled over from the bee barge into the honey house, into the room, and there is honeycomb everywhere. There's a bird there, a red crow, because we keep seeing these red crows, just like what Amy said she saw on the other side. And he said that they actually didn't believe her, and then he immediately gets swarmed by bees. Back to Lawrence. So Lawrence and Caleb are going to go check the McBride's house again for Mitchell when they hear the gunshot, and we can kind of guess what that was. They go back to where the pool was, and they find more of these red crows, just like what Reverend Dodd had doodled before he died, circling above 2 bodies. Mayor and Mrs. McBride, hacked to death with an axe. Now remember, Lawrence has been here to this house multiple times, and now he's kicking himself because they have been there for a time, because there's like decomposition and blowflies, but there's no sign of Mitchell, and Lawrence is wondering somehow if Jericho has made his way back to Crow Island and is using Mitchell as some kind of a vessel. Not that vessel. Stay focused. So Amy goes back to Mr. Passafume's house, but he was gone, so she goes back to her own house, goes for the bottle of Moscato. I have not had a drink in ages, but these last 2 books got me thinking about it. Devil couldn't reach me, I guess. So she talks about how she can, as others have said, also feel Jericho since the digging started. Lights a few candles, and one goes out, and then look, I'm all for, you do what you want to do in your house. But if we do any of this and the Ouija board comes out, I'm leaving. So she lights these candles, one goes out. She asks if this is Jericho, blow out another candle. One goes out. And with Amy, with everything you know, what reason on God's green flat earth would you ask that? That's a joke. I don't think the earth is flat. It's very much round. For whatever reason, she chooses this time to ask about the passcode for Chad's phone. And this leads her to go to their home office, and she just ransacks it. And there's these brochures for Chad's boating company. There's one female staff member. Her name is Ella. 4 letters. Chad's changed passcode. Now, nothing is working, of course. But Chad's phone comes on. And Amy thinks that Jericho is just letting this happen for a reason. What's the reason? Who knows? It only stays on long enough for Amy to look at this text thread between Chad and Ella. And there's a bikini selfie, but that's the only thing she can see before it cuts off. So Amy is in the throes of her emotions and a rage. She tries to get her wedding rings off because she's still been wearing them and they won't go over her knuckle. Tries the dish soap. Now, I used to work at a jewelry counter and dish soap never failed to get a stuck ring off. Then she goes for the kitchen knife and is going to try to cut off her finger. Now, she does end up not doing that, which is good. So she gets this idea that Chad cheated on her, so she's going to cheat too with Nate. Now, first of all, this isn't the time or the place. Second, it's not really cheating since your husband is deceased. So she goes to the Dodd house. Nate's gone. But she finds the picture of the young Reverend and Samantha Dodd on the bee barge when someone comes into the house. It's Lauren, Nate's girlfriend, who has chosen a very bad time to come and check on him. Back to Lawrence. So since everything is dead, Lawrence and Caleb are using some bicycles that they borrowed from the McBrides to get around. Lawrence tells Caleb, go door to door, just see if you can find Mitchell. Lawrence goes to the jailhouse to find Stephen, who committed murder earlier, gone. Cell unlocked, keys on the floor. He finds Claire, the secretary, dead behind her desk, nearly decapitated. Don't need to speculate. I think we all know what and who did it. Back to Nate. Nate is stumbling back to his house, just covered in bee stings. He's got the rest of this memory, and he said he had seen something enter his father that night and take over him. This was the night that Jericho was conceived. So he gets to his house, or his family home, to find that Lauren has come, and he just passes out. So now we get, not sure to really call this a flashback or a dream or whatever, but Nate reminisces about this time he and Bridget went for a roll in the hay, and Jericho had apparently followed them, and they ended up not doing anything since that kind of killed the mood. So now we're just, Amy and Lauren are just kind of getting Nate back in, getting him patched up, kind of chit-chat back and forth and share drinks, so not much happening there. Back to Lawrence. So Lawrence is at home, and whatever anger he had early has now dissipated. And he wonders if Mitchell somehow cut the power, but that doesn't explain the cars dying and the helicopter going down. He says he felt a pulse before all that happened, and that, of course, sounded like an EMP, which, according to Google, is a short, intense burst of electromagnetic radiation that can temporarily disrupt or permanently damage electrical and electronic devices by overloading them with electric current. Now, Dennis, the photo guy, shows up at Lawrence's house with these aerial photos that the deputy had been taking before the helicopter went down. They lay them all out and they look at them. What do they show? Well, we don't know, because now we go back to Amy. This is part of why I don't like shifting POVs. It's a lot of running around, and I don't like that, but the author did not ask my opinion. So Amy falls asleep and has this dream about the other side with the barn filled with the boo hag skins. But as she's going through and kind of looking at them, she recognizes some of these faces. She knows them. Her mom, her dad, Bridget, and Reverend Dodd. Reverend Dodd's skin starts to feel up, and Amy just takes off running. Now, I actually had to read this twice before I realized at this point she was not dreaming. This was real. So she is running down Oak Alley, and Boo Hag Dodd is chasing her. Runs to her house where she has things to protect herself. Runs by the pool, and I do think this was all in her head, but she said Jericho was crawling out of her pool, axe in hand. But I do think that at least was in her head. She took cover under her bed sheets. Classic boogeyman defense. So she comes up. There is, in fact, a boo hag sitting on her floor, counting the bristles of a broom. And blue bottles are a defense as well, because I used to manage an antique store, and these two people from Georgia came in looking specifically for blue bottles. And he goes, I guess you don't know anything about blue bottles. And I just said, oh, you going to catch a boo hag? And he went, oh, well, how do you know that? I said, I'm from Appalachia. I know more than you. So anyway, Amy also sees her hairbrush and her colander have been discarded and assumes that it's already counted those. So she's able to get to her door, and the boo hag gives chase to her. She gets to her living room, smashes a jar of marbles, grabs up another one, and she's just waiting while it's counting these marbles and is hoping like hell that the sun comes up before it gets finished. So Amy has dumped out the last of her marbles, and the boo hag's almost done counting. So she tries to get up and leave, but it's not so distracted that it probably won't chase her. So she's now kind of backed up to this window, and she does feel something warm on her back and is hoping that it's the sun. So she rips the curtains open and says the boo hag starts to sizzle like meat in hot oil. So at that moment, there's a knock on the door. She just cries out for help. And Lawrence bursts in, shoots the boo hag, and tells Amy that they're all having a town meeting at the Dodds. So now we're back with Nate. So Nate is trying to explain that he also saw Mr. Passafume in the honey house before the bees swarmed him. And if Mr. Passafume is somehow a boo hag agent, I'm going to be very disappointed because he's been my favorite character so far. So Nate tells Lauren about Jericho and growing up and how he hated him, but still felt the need to defend him from school bullies and such because he was still his brother. So they've gathered all these residents, and they're going to stay there while they try to get a plan worked out. Lawrence shows Nate the aerial pictures of the island and all of this digging that they've been doing, this excavating. It is a massive skeleton. Nate described it as being like curled into like a fetal position under the island. And flashback, this is from Reverend Dodd. So he's talking about how strange the tremors are, and he's gotten a visitor, and it's Mitchell McBride. Not knocking on the door, but pounding, like desperate. Back to Nate, present day. Nate is trying to convince Lauren to just leave and let him get her off the island, but she's like, nope, I'm staying. And he's still got this urge to dig, and he thinks he might have figured out what he's supposed to be looking for. Samantha was just racked with these nightmares while she was pregnant with Jericho, and he had told her that Bridget said if you write your nightmare down and bury it, that it would go away. And it did just dawn on Nate that her nightmares did eventually go away. Now, what was her favorite place at the house? Her flower garden. Back to Amy. So some of the townspeople are going out to look for Mitchell. They've checked surrounding homes. We're looking for guns, for ammunition. And these tremors that started after Jericho was buried do coincide with some little freak accidents on the island, including the boating accident that killed Chad. So Amy gets the urge to dig, and she goes upstairs, and I guess correctly for once, she's going to Jericho's room. Again, that's the first place I would have started looking. And she does see out the window Nate and Lauren digging in the garden, but she doesn't have time for that. So she goes into Reverend Dodd's room, pulls open the drawer to the side table where the key is. And in that drawer is one of these red crows that's just been pinned there by a knife. And underneath it is Reverend Dodd's diary. So Nate and Lauren are digging. They do indeed find something, a sealed jar with a folded piece of paper inside. And now we're going to a flashback from Reverend Dodd's diary, seemingly read by Amy. So in this entry, Reverend Dodd is talking about Mitchell telling him he knows that Jericho was buried alive. Not really alive in the practical sense. And that he's full grown now and ready to breathe. And that he wasn't supposed to have feelings, but somehow he did. Does this mean that Jericho was supposed to have been some kind of harbinger? He also says the Red Crow is showing him things that it led him to I'm assuming he's talking about Samantha, stash of pain pills and cigarettes. Neither one of those are things that you should be using during pregnancy. And that he needs to dig to know more. So back to Amy. So Amy goes in Jericho's room and it's a shrine to her. Mitchell said he wasn't supposed to have feelings, but he did for Amy. There were pictures of her everywhere, like a weird Leela shrine, only Amy is the Leela. And Jericho also had all of his little farm animals, and he painted them these weird colors, like all of the animals and these weird inverted colors from the other side. Then Amy realizes he's seen it, that he'd been there. And then on the back of that, she realizes and understands it was because he was from there. Nate and Lauren come in and they are just as shocked, but he shows Amy the jar and Nate says he saw us. Jericho saw us. I do want to say, I am wondering, did Jericho actually take these pictures? Because he would have had to develop them himself, because if he took them to the photo studio, surely that would have raised some suspicions. But in Reverend Dodd's diary, he talked about something bad in his past, and he cut off his hand in Matthew 5:30. Did Reverend Dodd take the pictures of Amy? Is that why Jericho's room was always locked, to hide his shame? Well, we don't know. We're back to Lawrence. So they have changed tactics. Instead of looking for Mitchell, now they're just going to look for survivors. There is an animal of some sort that has been going around killing people. And they find a body with part of an antler still in it, and the animal, a black elk from the other side. They're doing this standoff with it, and out of the woods comes Mr. Pacifume, and he's actually able to touch it, and he shoots it. Now, I have been close to an elk. I had one run me off the road once, long time ago, and you really do not appreciate how massive those animals are unless you've seen one up close. And he says this is one of the gentler ones. Back to Nate. So they retreated downstairs. Nate says that Jericho had seen them. And apparently, once before, they were on a picnic together when they were younger. Amy and Bridget decided they were going to play a prank on Nate and see if he could figure out who was who if they swapped clothes. So Nate, of course, found him out pretty early on, and he and Bridget, run off, Bridget wearing Amy's clothes. And Jericho saw them together, and he thought Nate was with Amy, whom we know Jericho had a crush on, apparently, so maybe he did take the pictures. And the next day was when Jericho bought the axe. So now we're getting into Samantha Dodd's nightmare. So Nate's reading what she had written, and she apparently knew that Reverend Dodd, I don't know that if he specifically went to the honey house, but that he made a deal with the devil, except it wasn't the devil, it was this boo hag. He was so desperate to give her another baby that he resorted to this. She went to the other side in this nightmare and said she saw Jericho there and knew he was going to be bad. She also, the one that she calls Bad Thomas, her husband possessed by the boo hag, called this place the Island of Horns, and not Bad Thomas called it La La Land. Back to Nate. Also in Samantha's letter, she said that she saw Amy and remember that Amy had drowned when she was a kid and that she went to the other side. Samantha said she saw Mr. Pacifume come and get Amy and take her back. And so the others have come back from looking for survivors, and our group of 4 is now 7, and Mr. Pacifume is among them. So now we're hearing from Lawrence's point of view. They're having this town meeting. People are airing grievances. Amy and Nate give their theories about Jericho believing that Nate was actually with Amy and that he felt betrayed. And of course, it devolves into a yelling match. And Mr. Pacifume quiets it by bringing out the bourbon. Because what helps an already volatile situation? booze. Nate gets the glasses and they all have a drink, and I'm going to need a mocktail after this one. Amy, and wow, this is so good. So Mr. Passafume is finally going to talk, and it's all the honey house. The honey house door wasn't locked just for security. He was guarding it. It was the doorway to the other side, and Jericho was supposed to be the one to open it with blood. But he died before he was able to finish that. And with every kill that he made, Mr. Passafume said that door shook harder and harder and harder each time. So everyone in town started digging him back up. The skeleton under the island is Jericho Dodd, fully grown. Mr. Passafume said that he was charged with guarding the door and has been for a very long time. And to understand, we need to know about the Geechee woman, Adeline Drew, and for the first time, we are hearing from Mr. Passafume all the way in chapter 68. Adeline Drew came over to Crow Island on a slave ship after emancipation. Amy's great-great-grandfather conspired with these other wealthy men to form this secret slave trade. So Adeline came over already pregnant and angry. She went to the swamp and a boo hag took her, the same way it took Reverend Dodd. So she built this little shack with these stolen materials over this place where the veil was thinnest. She took up an axe and went and killed all of the illegal slavers, saving Amy's great-grandpa for last, and she just completely took off his head. So whoever was in charge, the sheriff at the time, they all chased her back to this shack where she gave birth and then just disappeared. So they go in there, she had disappeared, and there was just this baby alone, born in call. Now, an in-call baby is a baby born inside the amniotic sac still, or as they would say, still inside the water bag. And according to folklore, an in-call baby means that that baby is going to have some kind of spiritual power, and that they are also protected specifically from drowning. And that baby was left there to die. But he didn't. A family found him, a family with the surname Passafume, and Earl Passafume, aka Blue Bottles, was that baby. Now, something I forgot to mention earlier, Mitchell had stolen some of that honey from the honey house, the 100% purity. The only ones who committed actual acts of violence were the ones who ate the honey. Mr. Passafume said he needed to tell them all this whole story so that they can get safely off the island because he's going to stay. So Mr. Passafume continues, Jericho was a baby born from a boo hag. There were two others he said that he knew of, one in 1906 who lived for 5 days, and remember that Jericho was kept in hiding for 5 days after his birth. We still don't know what that was about. And one in 1928 who only lived for 2 days. And as if on cue, Nate asked the doctor if he wants to tell them what happened that night that Jericho was born or if he should do it. So the doctor said that when Jericho was born, he was born with no skin. Just, the red meat and the blue veins. He didn't seem to be in pain, and Reverend Dodd was immediately confronted with what it was that he'd done, and Dr. Cheever said he was just strung out with guilt over it. So Reverend Dodd and the doctor thought about just ending Jericho's life right there, like pretty much just going to euthanize him. But after a few days, his skin developed, and they figured it was all going to be okay. So Mr. Passafume tells them about the island, the doorway, the island of horns, La La Land, and how it has been trying to come through for decades because it is growing. They get some of the benefits from there, the cotton, the indigo, the honey, and it's not the air or the water or anything like that. What makes plants grow? Plants need pollination. And what makes honey and pollinates? Bees. The bees are from the other side. That's what makes the honey special. They're La La Land bees. And before we get to hear any more, a couple gunshots. Back to Lawrence. Lawrence goes out. He goes to check on Caleb and this guy named Dustin who stayed out to guard the door while everyone else was having this meeting. Dustin saw a boo hag, tried to shoot it, but he missed. And of course, the air's getting worse, and they're all like wearing COVID masks just to be able to try to breathe out there. But it's midday, and the sun is already setting, and we know what roams after dark. Lawrence sees Mr. Passafume and Amy heading off to the trees, and Nate and Lauren are coming towards him. We're back to Amy. Mr. Passafume has taken her to show her something, and he just kind of wafts the air around. And where he's wafted the air around, you can see through it to the other side. And Amy can do it too, because she's been there. And Mr. Passafume says he's afraid that Amy's going to want to go back, but now I don't know what brought him to that conclusion, because Amy seems to be terrified of that place. He also tells her it's not that he wants to stay, but that he can't leave, that he's tried a few times and he gets sick and he's unable to breathe. Now we've got another flashback from Reverend Dodd's diary. He's telling us about the bird, and it was something seen in his nightmares. And it was following him, so he killed it. And he talks about Mitchell and how all this is his fault, and then goes back to digging. So we're back to Nate, and we're two groups. The one's going to the jailhouse to look for flares to try and signal for some help, and the others are going to go with Mr. Passafume. They get to his house. He lets them in the garage where he's got crates and crates stacked of blue bottles. Blue bottles that can trap a boo hag. What are they going to do with them? Mr. Passafume says, we're going to turn the island blue. Back to Lawrence. Now, this chapter kind of took me out of the story. And I'm going to pretend it didn't happen, and we're going to move on. You want to know what it said? Well, buy the book, because I ain't talking about it. Also, just FYI, there are a lot of things that I do not talk about in these videos. I just kind of hit the high points. Part of this is to encourage you to go buy the book and read it yourself, or borrow it from the library, because libraries are cool and you should support yours. If I did every little thing and not just the big events, these videos would be 10 hours long. Nobody's going to want to sit here and watch that, and Rita doesn't want to edit all that. Flashback from Mr. Passafume. The thing that happened that caused Mr. Passafume to stop talking to Reverend Dodd went to Mr. Passafume and told him about the boo hag whispering in his ear, how it could help. Even though Reverend Dodd said he knew this is the opposite of what he should believe, he asked Mr. Passafume for the key to the honey house. Mr. Passafume said no. Reverend Dodd said okay and left. Psych. That's not what happened at all. He slipped Mr. Passafume a roofie, and after he passed out, stole the keys. I'm assuming he took them back, but that was what broke their friendship. Now we're back to Amy. They're carting these bottles in crates. They're hanging them in the trees, hopefully just to trap Jericho's essence and it disappear when the sun comes up. So as they're standing there, Tiny's head explodes. And then the crates start exploding. From the cover of the woods, Stephen is shooting at them, because you remember Stephen, who committed murder and was released from jail by Mitchell, is shooting at them, trying to destroy the bottles. We're assuming because the boo hags told him to. Mr. Passafume takes him out, and Lawrence and his group start shooting flares in the hopes that they just get seen by, like, literally anybody, as I continue to destroy my display. Back to Lawrence. They are working together in shifts to get these bottles hung on these trees. Lawrence steps out for his turn and notices there's no breeze, but he can hear these bottles knocking together. Flashback from Reverend Dodd's diary. Mitchell did in fact cut off Reverend Dodd's hand, and the crow is back. I assume it's a different crow, not the same one, since it's still dead in a drawer upstairs. He did say cutting off the hand of sin did nothing, and he didn't know where Mitchell took it, but we know he took it to the honey house. This is the last entry that Reverend Dodd made before he died, probably from sepsis, since he said his stump was leaking blood and pus. He also had a jar of the honey, and he'd apparently been drinking it. Now, I love honey. It's a great natural sweetener. It goes great on cottage cheese, and I could drink it too. Back to Amy, who has found herself back in Jericho's room, and she just starts ripping all these pictures of her off the wall. She also notices the wind whistling over the bottles seems louder than it was before, and that she can still feel Jericho out there. Back to Nate. Historically, Nate was the one who stopped Jericho from banging his head on the wall. And after the massacre, Lawrence let Nate go inside the cell with Jericho, and Jericho started banging his head on this wall. And this is a jail, it's a cinder block wall. Nate moved his hand, and Jericho cracked his skull on the back of that wall. And now you remember, Jericho didn't speak, but he looked at Nate and said, "I'm so sorry, Nathaniel. I know that Jericho's supposed to be the villain, but I can't help but feel at least a little bit sorry for him," because Nate even says maybe it wasn't his fault. He didn't ask to be born. He was always trying to get back to the other side, so maybe he didn't want to be here in the first place. Back to Lawrence. So Lawrence is keeping watch over people who are sleeping, and when they change a guard shift because they're all kind of taking turns, a bee follows Rose in and stings her, and she goes to squash it, and Lawrence notices something odd about this bee. We know the bees are from the other side, and that's what makes the honey special, but then these bees just start swarming the house. And the people who just went out come running right back in, being swarmed with bees. Now we get to chapter 83, and this one's interesting because it's not headed by a character specifically, it's just headed with Crow Island. Amy all of a sudden remembers these tunnels that run under the Dodd house and used to play in them as kids, and she thinks that Mitchell might be down there. So she and Nate go down, tell no one, and there's bodies down there. So they just go to run out, and the door to this tunnel latches. And Mitchell has locked them in. Of course, no one brought a gun, because why would you do that? Up in the house, they hear screaming. And we can surmise that Mitchell has started killing people. Lawrence is having some flashbacks to that whole thing with Jericho and says that he hesitated that time, but this time he's not. Amy and Nate go out the other end of this tunnel where there is a rock wall with a rope ladder that is decades old at this point. I just go around. Amy says that she can still hear this hissing from these bottles, so it looks like they may have done their job. Lawrence shoots Mitchell, dead center mass. But remember how he was in the jailhouse? He's wearing a bulletproof vest. So Mitchell is now getting chased by Lawrence through the house. Nate and Amy do make it back up there, and Amy, for whatever reason, heads toward the beach, and Nate steps aside to let someone go into the house, someone who is covered in bees, and it's Mr. Passafume. Those are his bees. So Lawrence is in the parlor with Mitchell. He's hacked at Tina's leg with an axe, and he's holding David hostage, axe to his throat. Mr. Passafume is making his way through this house with his bees, and Mitchell gets swarmed by the bees. They go in his mouth, up his nose, and Mitchell flails around and then just collapses. Amy is out watching these bottles, and she knows that Jericho's in there. And then the bottles, they just explode. Shards everywhere, and apparently the flares have worked. They were seen, and help has arrived. For whatever reason, Nate decides now or never, goes and grabs his dad's ashes as the wounded are being taken off the island by the Coast Guard and some Marines. He fulfills Reverend Dodd's last wishes and scatters those ashes over Samantha's grave. Nate says he'll come back, but not wait so long between visits. And Amy has taken a gun. She's going to the honey house. She's going to close the store permanently. And a Marine had actually followed her, and he takes out 3 more of these boo hags. And then something comes out of the honey house. It's the horned boo hag that has been haunting Amy's dreams coming out of there. She shoots it, the kickback from this gun knocking her down. She asks this Marine who followed her to destroy the honey house. And it is just in shards by the time he's done. They get to the ferry. They're all on the ferry leaving the island, and so is Mr. Passafume. Amy tries to get him to stop, to turn around. He won't let him. He says that he's tired. And my papa said that to me in the days before he died, that he was tired, and he was also 92, so I get it. So Mr. Passafume hands Amy this box of letters. They're all addressed to names I don't recognize, so I'm not sure if I should be embarrassed that I don't know who any of these people are or not. Matthew Jenks, Brianna Bookman, Detective Samantha Blue, Gideon Dupree, and Maddie Boyle. I'm not sure if those are real or made up people, so let me know in the comments, and let me know if I should be embarrassed or not that I don't know who any of these names belong to. Mr. Pacifume just asks to see that they are delivered, and he dies peacefully with a smile on his face. And now we're at the end. So it's 3 months on. Amy, Nate, and Lauren have met up just kind of as like a reunion. A note in his pants pocket had told Amy that Mr. Pacifume wanted to be cremated and wanted his ashes scattered over whatever remains of the honey house. Right now, Crow Island has been taken under the control of the U.S. government, and the 3 of them have decided to go back in if they're ever allowed to. And they all agree that Jericho is finally gone since none of them can feel him anymore. And that is Dig by J.H. Markert. This book was so good, and aside from the shifting in viewpoints, which I don't like, which I have stated multiple times, it was still amazing, and I love reading stories that sound familiar. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go buy more brooms. Okay, that went great. Rita, double time the editing on this one because the book that handpicked next is kind of small, so that one might be kind of a quick read. What's that? Oh my God! Where did you come from? Did you get any of that?
Yes. Please put you somewhere until I can figure out what to do with you. Oh, why is it sticky? Oh, why is it sticky? Why are you sticky? Ugh. Okay, let me just figure out what to do with you. Ugh. So gross. Oh, it's getting everywhere. Okay,
Okay, I'll figure